Hello, everyone. I'm Graham Ledger, and welcome to the Daily Ledger, our cover story, the two-step forward, one-step back presidential nomination process. Both the Democrat and Republican frontrunners had okay election nights in their respective primaries and caucuses. However, so did their opponents. More on the Democrats in just a few minutes. But among the Republicans, Donald Trump with a big win in Arizona, while Ted Cruz took all of Utah. In the Grand Canyon state, Trump 47%, Cruz 25%, John Kasich 10%. So 58 delegates to Trump. Now over to Utah. Cruz 69% of the vote, Kasich 17%, Trump 14%, so 40 delegates to Cruz.
We need to make America great again, and I think that him being a businessman, he can really pull us together. Our economy, help with the border control, and I think that those are really important top key issues in helping our country.
It's wonderful that Utah is becoming a big platform for the nation now.
Well, I'm going to call all my family members, and I'm going to say, vote for Ted Cruz.
I don't believe anybody will have enough delegates to get to the convention. Thank goodness I won Ohio. If I hadn't won Ohio, I think Donald Trump would be the person who would receive the delegates, but that's all been stopped with his defeat in Ohio. And we're campaigning all across the country. And for the first time, really since I've been in this race for the last 3 weeks, people are beginning to understand that my name is John Kasich and not Governor of Ohio, because I had been largely ignored. But now, with the attention, we feel very good about where we are, and we're going to continue to move forward and compete in all the remaining states, and the convention will be nothing more than an extension of this political process. So, the Kasich strategy is to suck up just enough delegates as to deny Trump and Cruz the requisite 1237. But what then? Both of these candidates are blowing his doors off. Answer: the establishment to the rescue. So it could happen at the convention. So bottom line, either Trump or Cruz must get to the magic number, or there is going to be some kind of convention in July in Cleveland. Joining me now from Kansas City, Missouri, partner with Axiom Strategies, Travis Smith. Travis, Arizona, let's start with that. Interesting numbers out of Arizona. The polls were out the door, literally, and I'm guessing maybe some people didn't even get to cast a vote. They had to cut it off somewhere. Also, 2x the number to Donald Trump versus Ted Cruz in terms of the popular vote. And among the early balloting, the mail-ins, 250,000 in one area of Phoenix alone. And you have to imagine that probably, we can assume, a majority of those mail-ins went to Donald Trump.
I think that's right. Thanks for having me on, Graham. So last night was a good night for Donald Trump in Arizona. It was a good night for Ted Cruz in Utah. Who did not have a good night last night was John Kasich. The sad fact is he lost in Arizona to a guy who's not even on the ballot, in Marco Rubio. I do not see the pathway forward for Kasich at this point. The baseball analogy here is he's a team in September who's mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, talking about going to the playoffs.
Right.
There's just really no pathway forward for him at this point.
We should point out that the Rubio vote largely was probably because he dropped out of the race less than a week ago. But the point is made, and Donald Trump once again wins with a plurality and not a majority. What does this tell you?
It's interesting. It's interesting. But again, Donald Trump's asking for a two-man race. Ted Cruz is asking for a two-man race. This thing needs to be a two-man race. John Kasich at this point is just primarily a spoiler. He's only won one state, his home state. He's shown time and again that he's unable to compete anywhere outside of Ohio.
I think
I don't anticipate we're going to see anything of substance out of him going forward.
I want to talk about him in just a minute. I want to finish up with Arizona, though. The lines out the door, I think that part of it could have been driven by the terrorist attacks that we saw overseas in the last 6 months. We've had 3 major terror attacks, one on our soil. I think that probably helped drive people to the polls. When you go over to Utah, an absolutely crushing victory for Ted Cruz. But when you step back and you look at the big picture on this election night, one caucus in Utah, one primary in Arizona, Ted Cruz really should have won both. He needs to change his trajectory because right now he is not on a trajectory to win.
I disagree with that assessment, Graham. No, I think that he has a real pathway here. There's a strategy to get the requisite number of delegates here going forward. He has to perform very well. But what we've seen from him in all these past states, and frankly in polling, even as recent as yesterday in both states, Ted's outperforming all the public polls that we're seeing. I think we're going to see him do very well. You're seeing the entire Republican Party coalescing around him right now. We've got a little bit of a reprieve here, and I think 2 weeks. We've got Wisconsin, and then another week or so before another number of states. And he's gearing up. I think we're going to see the party coalesce. Hopefully, we'll see John Kasich drop out, and this thing will be a real race.
Kasich is not going to drop out. He's made that known. Ted Cruz is at 50% of target right now. Obviously, the dynamic has changed with Marco Rubio dropping out and the prior last couple of months, but still, the numbers are the numbers. He's at 50% of target. Donald Trump is at 95% of target. And again, if these paths continue, if this operates in a vacuum, which it will not, but just play along with me for a minute, Donald Trump at 95% of 1237 and Ted Cruz at 50% of 1237 appears to be heading for a brokered convention.
It could be. And frankly, I think Ted Cruz would do well in the case of a brokered convention. It remains to be seen, though. You know, we're picking up steam every day. The campaign is seeing endorsements that, you know, the majority of the party would not have dreamed of prior to today. I think there are a lot of key signals here that as we move forward, Ted Cruz will overperform expectations.
So how significant is the Jeb Bush endorsement in your mind in terms of the big picture of the establishment Republican class?
Well, as we know, Ted Cruz is the furthest thing from the establishment Republican class, but what it tells us is that the party is coalescing. There is a strong anti-Trump movement right now, and they are circling the wagons around Ted Cruz in a big way.
So at the end of the day, Donald Trump picks up on this election night 58 delegates, and Ted Cruz picks up 40 delegates. That's a net gain of 18 delegates for Donald Trump. If that kind of trend continues, again, you know, we don't know that it will, but if that kind of trend continues, there is not going to be a 1237 winner.
Agree. You know, the next big state here is Wisconsin. I would look for Ted to do very well there. Momentum's going to shift between now and 2 weeks from yesterday, and we're going to see Ted Cruz perform very well, and then give him that kind of extra boost he needs going into those late states.
But if Donald Trump was about a week later, we have the New York primary,
right.
And it's proportional unless there's a 50% threshold met. And at this point, last polling I see, Donald Trump is dominating in New York. If you're Ted Cruz, obviously your strategy is to try and knock him down a little bit from that 50% plus one perch. On the other hand, if you're Donald Trump, you take that 50% and you win all the delegates in New York, you're going to be well on your way to preventing both John Kasich and Ted Cruz from any shot at the nomination.
I think that I'm not entirely opposed to your assessment there. I think that's largely correct. But I do think that, you know, with some of the recent endorsements, the coalescing of the more establishment-minded Republicans around Ted Cruz, you can look for him to do well in New York.
Either way, John Kasich, obviously his strategy is very simple, and that's to deny the nomination to both Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and hope the Washington establishment, the Republican establishment, rides to his rescue in July in Cleveland. It would be an unbelievable sight, but hey, it could happen. Travis, thanks. Coming up next, Hillary's not-so-great election night against Bernie. Also ahead, documenting the chaos at our southern border.
Border Patrol and ICE confirm that they are seeing increased numbers of Bangladeshis, Somalis, Pakistanis, and other nationals of countries of concern coming across the southern border